Have you ever sat by the phone waiting for a call that never came? Or maybe you've typed out a long message, read it over and over, then hit send, only to be met with silence. If you're a parent over 60, you might know exactly what that feels like. That deep, quiet ache when your child seems to be drifting further and further away. You wonder, what happened? What did I do wrong? And the hardest part isn't the lack of contact, it's the not knowing. Let me say something right from the heart. If you're going through this, you're not alone. Many parents feel this pain, especially when their children grow up, build their own lives, and sometimes, without warning, stop showing up. No more check-ins. No more updates. Birthdays come and go with a text or nothing at all. You try to stay close, to be present, but somehow your presence feels like too much. And that's devastating. But what if I told you that this distance, as painful as it is, might not be about you at all? And what if understanding this, really understanding it, could bring you a kind of peace you haven't felt in years? Today, I want to talk to you about something deeply explored in modern psychology, the hidden world inside our minds, the unconscious. It's a place full of memories, old wounds, and emotions we don't always understand, even as adults. And in many cases, when a child pulls away from a parent, it's not because of something you've done recently. It's because of something much deeper, something they might not even be aware of themselves. It is believed in modern psychology that our relationships, especially within families, are shaped not just by what happens now, but by what happened long ago. When your child avoids you, they may not be responding to you as you are today, but to a version of you that exists in their memory. That version could be based on a moment you forgot, a look they misread, or something they felt but never said. And here's the thing, it might have nothing to do with your intentions. Think about this for a moment. You might be reaching out with love, kindness, and patience. But if your child carries guilt, shame, or pain they can't quite name, they might pull away, not because of you, but because being near you brings up something they haven't worked through. Maybe your presence reminds them of pressure or of expectations they couldn't meet. Maybe they're projecting emotions onto you that were meant for someone else entirely. Psychologists call this transference. It's when a person sees you through the lens of unresolved feelings from the past, and not for who you really are. I know that's hard to hear. Because as parents, all we want is to give love and receive love. We offer support. We give advice. We check in, not to control, but because we care. So when that's met with silence, or worse, coldness, it cuts deep. You might even start blaming yourself. But here's what I want you to hold on to. Their behavior does not define your worth. Their silence is not a verdict. Experts in psychology often remind us that the unconscious mind doesn't respond to logic. It responds to emotion. So no matter how many times you explain yourself, apologize for old wounds, or try to make things right, if they aren't ready to face their inner struggles, it may only push them further. It's like trying to calm a storm with a whisper. Sometimes, no matter how softly you speak, the wind keeps howling. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Should I just give up? Should I stop trying? And the answer isn't simple. It's not about giving up, it's about stepping back with dignity. It's about recognizing that love doesn't always look like chasing. Sometimes real love means standing still and giving space, not as a punishment, not as revenge, but as an act of wisdom, of self-respect. Because constantly reaching out while being pushed away, that's not love. That's self-abandonment. When you keep insisting, when you send message after message or try to fix things through force, you may be unknowingly reinforcing the very thing that's keeping you apart. It's often said that what we resist persists, that the more we try to control or correct emotional distance, the deeper it can become. And that's why strategic silence, a respectful pause, can be more powerful than any explanation. You see, when you stop chasing, something shifts. Not just in them, but in you. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself you may have lost in the pursuit of closeness. your peace, your confidence, your joy. And as hard as it is, that's where healing starts. Now let me tell you a little story. A woman in her late 60s once told me about her son. They had once been very close, talking almost every day. But after he got married and had children, the calls slowed, then stopped. She tried everything, dropping by, offering help, sending thoughtful gifts, but nothing worked. In fact, the more she tried, the more distant he became. She felt invisible, ashamed, like a burden, until one day she made a choice. She stopped reaching out, not out of bitterness, but out of love for herself. Instead of checking her phone every hour, she started painting again. She went on walks with friends. She wrote letters to herself, pouring out her hurt, her confusion, her anger. And over time, something changed, not with her son, but within her. She stopped needing his response to feel whole. Months later, he called, not with a grand apology, just a simple, "Hi, Mom, how have you been?" That call wasn't the end of their distance, but it was a start. And it came, not because she fought for it, but because she stopped fighting herself. I'm not saying this will happen for everyone, but I am saying that you deserve peace, even if your child doesn't call. You deserve joy, even if the door stays closed. And you deserve love, especially your own. It's been said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. So maybe today is a chance to look within, to ask, am I chasing my child, or am I chasing an old wound? Am I seeking connection, or trying to heal a version of myself that never felt seen? When we stop asking someone else to make us feel whole, we begin the journey of wholeness. A journey not away from our children, but toward ourselves. That doesn't mean giving up on them. It means not giving up on you. You've lived through so much. You've loved, you've lost, you've kept going. This moment, the silence, the waiting, the heartbreak, it's one chapter. It's not the whole story. And no matter what your child does or doesn't do, you still have a life to live. A beautiful, meaningful, sacred life. A life that doesn't wait for anyone's permission. So take a breath. Place your hand gently on your heart. And remind yourself, I am enough, even in the silence. I am worthy, even without reply. I am loved, even if they can't show it. Because you are. Let's keep going. It's strange, isn't it? How silence can be louder than shouting. When someone you love pulls away, not with anger, not with a fight, but with nothing at all, it leaves you with questions that echo through the quiet. And when it's your own child, that silence isn't just emotional, it feels physical. Like an empty chair at the table, a photo on the wall that used to make you smile, but now makes your chest tighten just a bit. As we grow older, our hearts don't become less tender. In fact, they grow softer. And when you've held a child in your arms, watched them take their first steps, stayed up nights worrying when they were sick or hurting, well, their absence now doesn't feel like distance. It feels like grief. A loss that's hard to name because they're still alive, but somehow no longer present. This kind of pain isn't just sadness. It touches something much deeper, something unconscious. In psychology, there's a concept known as the repetition compulsion. Our mind's tendency to repeat painful patterns from the past, especially when they've never been resolved. So when a child avoids you and you find yourself desperate to fix it, the urgency you feel may be more than just parental instinct. It could be your own past calling out for repair. That's a hard truth to sit with, but also a freeing one. Because once you see it, you can start to shift. You can begin to understand that not every silence from your child is a reflection of your failure, but possibly a reflection of their struggle. Maybe they grew up in a world where emotions were hard to express. Maybe they didn't learn how to be vulnerable. Maybe they're carrying their own quiet grief. And maybe, just maybe, Being close to you brings up feelings they're not ready to feel. In psychology, there's a concept called projection, when people unconsciously assign feelings they don't want to feel onto someone else. So even if you speak with love, your child may hear judgment. Even if you offer help, they may feel controlled. It's not fair, and it's not your fault. But knowing this can help you stop blaming yourself. Think of it like this. You've been offering love in the language you know, but they may not be able to hear it right now. Not because the message is wrong, but because the receiver is stuck in their own noise. The more you speak, the more they pull away. And it's heartbreaking. But it's also human. Now here's the hard part. Learning to be okay even when things don't change. That doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go of what you can't control. When you release the need for a certain response, you also release the pain of being ignored. You begin to shift the focus from, how do I get them to love me back, to, how do I love myself enough to stop suffering in silence? There's power in stepping back, not as punishment, not with bitterness, but with grace. It's not about slamming doors, it's about gently closing them when you've stood there too long. Because waiting endlessly, checking your phone at every ding, rewriting texts before you send them, that's a kind of emotional erosion. You deserve better than that. Instead, start placing your energy where it can grow. Return to the things that nourish your soul. Pick up an old hobby. Visit that friend you've been meaning to call. Write your thoughts in a journal, not to send, but just to release. Let your pain have a voice on the page so it doesn't build a storm inside. You see, our unconscious mind holds stories we didn't even know we were telling ourselves. And often the child we're trying to reach today isn't just our son or daughter, it's the little child inside of us, still hoping to be chosen, seen, loved unconditionally. Maybe this is your moment to choose that inner child. To tell them, you are worthy. You've always been worthy. You don't need someone else's approval to feel whole. And what about boundaries? That word can feel cold, but in truth, it's the warmest thing you can give yourself. Boundaries are how we stop being torn apart by someone else's absence. They're how we remind ourselves that love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. You can still love your child and take a break from the pain. You can still hope for reconciliation without losing yourself in the wait. Sometimes, when we stop performing love, when we stop chasing, proving, persuading, we create a space where real connection can begin. The unconscious doesn't respond to logic. It responds to symbols, to repeated patterns, to emotion. So if the old pattern was, I reach, they retreat, maybe the new one is, I pause and let them feel my absence. That absence is not a game. It's not manipulation. It's a gift. Because when someone is used to you always being there, always forgiving, always calling first, your silence might be the only thing that speaks loud enough to be heard. And if it doesn't, if they still don't call, don't write, don't show up, then you keep living anyway. Not in defiance, not in defeat, but in dignity. You keep choosing yourself. You keep choosing peace. You didn't stop being a parent. You didn't stop loving them. You simply stopped abandoning yourself in the process. And in doing that, you teach by example. You show them what emotional maturity looks like, what grace under pain looks like, what love, without conditions, can become when it's rooted in self-respect. There's a quiet strength in not reaching out, in not filling the silence with explanations, in not defending your past or begging for your place in their present. That strength isn't easy. It's a choice you make every morning, every time you see their name and wonder if today will be different. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But your worth doesn't live in their decision. You are a whole person, with memories, stories, laughter, tears. You are not just a parent who's been left behind. You are still the person who once rocked them to sleep, wiped away their tears, and stood by them through everything. That love doesn't disappear. It evolves. Let it evolve into something that includes you. And if they return one day, if they reach out, unsure and awkward and full of their own wounds, you will be ready. Not to be rescued, but to meet them where they are. Without need, without anger, just presence. But even if they don't come back, you will still have yourself. You will still have your wisdom, your heart, your courage. And those things, they don't fade. They deepen. You've already survived the silence. Now it's time to begin something new. Let's keep going. There comes a moment in every parent's life when you stop asking, when will they call, and begin wondering, who am I without their call? That shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes quietly, after many evenings of waiting, many mornings waking up to an inbox that stays empty. But one day, you don't just feel the pain, you start to feel something else, something softer. Clarity. And in that clarity, something remarkable happens. You begin to understand that love was never supposed to be a leash. That being a parent doesn't mean sacrificing your identity or your dignity. Emotional maturity isn't the absence of sadness. It's the ability to feel it fully, without letting it swallow you whole. You can love someone deeply and still set them free. You can want connection without making it your lifeline. And yes, you can hope for their return, but not because your happiness depends on it. Because your happiness, your peace, your worth have finally begun to grow roots inside you, not in their hands, not in their replies, but in the strength you've quietly cultivated. It's often said that our unresolved wounds live on in silence. And if we're not aware, we pass them down without even meaning to. So maybe, by choosing not to chase anymore, you've broken a cycle. Maybe your pause, your stillness, your refusal to beg, is the very thing that stops generations of emotional pain from moving forward. That's not failure. That's transformation. Now, this doesn't mean the grief disappears. Not at all. Grief lingers. It's the birthday that hurts more than it should. The holiday where their chair stays empty. The moment you hear someone else say mom or dad, and your chest tightens before you even know why. That's real. That's valid. You don't need to pretend it doesn't hurt, but you also don't have to build your life around the ache. Because what you do with that grief is up to you. You can let it harden you, or you can let it guide you back to yourself, to your own joy, your own wholeness, your own story. In psychology, this process is known as working through. It's not about forgetting. It's about gently, patiently, making peace with the reality of what is, not clinging to the fantasy of what could have been. It's the slow unfolding of truth in your heart. And when you stop expecting your child to say all the right things or show up exactly as you imagined, you make room for yourself, for new relationships, even for forgiveness. Forgiveness, by the way, doesn't always mean reconciliation. It doesn't even need a conversation. Sometimes forgiveness is simply the choice to no longer carry the weight, to release the resentment, the self-blame, the what-ifs. Because if love becomes a currency, something you give only if it's returned, it loses its purity. But if love becomes a quiet presence within you, steady and true, it becomes something powerful, something unshakable. You may still feel the urge to call, to write, to explain. That's okay. Those urges are human. But now, instead of acting from desperation, you can pause and ask, will this bring me peace, or am I just trying to be heard by someone who can't hear me right now? When you start choosing peace more often than pursuit, you step into a new kind of power. One that doesn't depend on being needed. One that comes from knowing you are enough, even in the absence of applause, even in the absence of their voice. True love, to remain love, must always include freedom. And yes, freedom means your child may stay distant. But it also means you are free. From guilt, from grasping, from the belief that your value is measured by someone else's approval. You are not just the parent who's been left out. You are the person who survived the ache and still chose kindness. Who felt forgotten and still chose to show up for yourself? Who stopped chasing, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally started loving yourself too? And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, if they return, you'll be ready. Not as someone who needs saving, but as someone who's already whole. You won't need to tell them everything you went through. You won't need to make them understand. Because the truth will already be living in your eyes, in your steadiness, in the peace you've made with the silence. But whether they come back or not, your story isn't over. In fact, in many ways, it's just beginning. The part of your story where you stop waiting and start living. The part where you fill your days not with longing, but with purpose. Maybe that means picking up a pen and writing about what you felt. Maybe it's planting a garden, joining a class, or finally taking that trip. Maybe it's calling someone who does show up, who listens, who cares. There's still so much love waiting for you in this world. Sometimes it just arrives from unexpected places. And if your heart still aches, and I know it might, then let that ache be a teacher. Let it remind you of how deeply you've loved, how bravely you've shown up, even in the face of silence. Let it remind you that you are still here, still worthy, still becoming. It's been said that being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. And if you've made it this far, if you've faced your pain, looked at your patterns, and chosen growth over guilt, then you've already done something extraordinary. You've turned toward your truth. You've stopped the cycle. You didn't fail. You transformed. And from that transformation comes freedom. Not the kind that depends on who stays or goes, but the kind that lives inside you and can't be taken away. So here you are, still standing, still breathing, still growing. And no matter what happens next, you are enough. Let's keep going. You've made it this far with strength that probably no one sees. The kind of quiet strength that doesn't get awards or applause but lives in every breath you take when your heart feels heavy. The strength of not calling, not texting, not chasing, and still loving. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The kind that takes years to grow, and a kind that too few people ever acknowledge. You know, it's a hard truth that many people don't want to admit. Sometimes the people we love most will never fully understand us. And yet, we keep loving. Not because we're foolish, not because we're fragile, but because that's who we are. Parents, yes, but also human beings, capable of deep, enduring love, even when it's not returned the way we hoped. And that brings us to something powerful, something sacred. Acceptance. Acceptance is not surrender. It's not saying, "This is fine." It's saying, "This is real." And when you embrace what's real, you stop living in the past or chasing an ideal future. You begin to build something here, now, in the present. You take back your life, not from your child, but from the shadows of waiting. Because the truth is, your child's silence may never change. And I know how painful that is to hear. But if it does change, it won't be because you pushed. It'll be because something within them finally became ready. And whether that happens next week, next year, or never at all, your life is too precious to put on hold. It's okay to grieve the version of the relationship you wanted, to miss the child you remember, the connection you dreamt of. It's okay to feel that sharp edge of disappointment. But then, let yourself soften, not toward them necessarily, but toward yourself. You've carried so much. You've held on so tightly. Maybe now you can begin to let go, not of love, but of pain, not of memories, but of the need for them to be something they're not ready to be. There's a peace that only comes when you stop trying to fix what's broken and start tending to what's whole. You are still whole, even in the quiet, even in the longing. You are still here, and that matters more than you realize. So what do you do next? You live, fully, gently, bravely. You wake up and find beauty in small things. A morning light across your kitchen floor, the sound of birds outside your window, the warmth of your favorite cup of tea. You give your heart new places to land. You offer your wisdom to someone who does want to hear it, a neighbor, a friend, a stranger who becomes family. You tell your story, not to get sympathy, but to get free. Unprocessed pain doesn't disappear, it gets passed on. But once you see the pain, once you name it, hold it, and honor it, you stop handing it down. You become the ending of a pattern, the beginning of something better. And if one day your child returns, if they send a message, show up at your door, or simply whisper, "I'm sorry," you'll be there. Not as someone still waiting to be chosen, but as someone who already chose themselves. And if they don't, you'll still be whole. Because you've done the hardest thing. You've kept your heart open without letting it be trampled. You've chosen dignity over desperation, stillness over struggle, love over fear. This is your life. Not a life on pause, not a life built around unanswered questions, but a life blooming with resilience. You are allowed to thrive, to smile, to create joy even in the face of unfinished stories. And remember, silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's just space. Space where healing can happen. Space where realizations bloom. Space where love, the kind that doesn't beg, finally breathes. So as you step forward from this moment, hold your head high. You are not broken. You are not forgotten. You are the author of a new chapter. One where love is no longer a transaction, but a presence you carry within. One where your peace no longer depends on anyone else's permission. If no one else has told you lately, let me be the one to say it. You are enough. You've always been enough. You deserve love. You deserve rest. You deserve joy. Not because you did everything right, but because you are human. And that is enough. So take that walk. Make that phone call to someone who lifts your spirit. Try something new, even something small. Bake that cake. Sing that song. Plant that flower. Not to fill the silence, but to celebrate the strength that brought you here. And if this message spoke to your heart, please share your story in the comments. Your words may help someone else find their way through this same kind of hurt. Sometimes when we speak our pain, we become the light someone else is waiting to see. And if this video brought you comfort, give it a like and subscribe. Not just for more videos, but to remind yourself, your story matters. Your healing matters. Here's to living a life with grace. A life that doesn't chase love but radiates it. A life that honors your past but isn't trapped in it. A life that still finds beauty, even in the quiet. Because you, my friend, are not alone. You are growing. You are healing. And you are free. Here's to living your truth. To choosing yourself. To finding peace that doesn't need to be earned. Here's to living your best life, at any age.